Hey, sources tell me that Jayson Tatum has been fully cleared to play this season.
Sources close to the situation say that Jayson Tatum has officially been cleared to return this season. And if that sounds unbelievable, that's because it kind of is. Against the odds, against the usual recovery timelines, and against nearly every precedent we've seen in professional sports, Jayson Tatum is preparing to return to the court just 10 months after suffering one of the most devastating injuries an athlete can experience: an Achilles injury. For most players, an Achilles tear doesn't just end a season. It can alter an entire career. It's the kind of injury that forces athletes to spend a full year just trying to get back to where they were physically, and even longer to rediscover their rhythm and confidence on the court. Some players never truly return to their peak form after it. And yet somehow, here we are. The NBA world is watching as one of the league's brightest superstars prepares to step back onto the floor far sooner than anyone expected. Teammates are excited. Fans are excited. Analysts are amazed that the recovery process has moved this quickly. But strangely enough, the conversation surrounding Tatum's return hasn't been entirely about the comeback itself. Instead, the debate has once again shifted towards something that feels all too familiar: Jayson Tatum versus Jaylen Brown. Yes, somehow in 2026, we're still doing this. Rather than simply appreciating the fact that one of the best players in basketball is returning from a brutal injury, the discussion has once again turned into a debate about whose team the Boston Celtics really belong to. Some voices in the media are already asking the same old questions. What will Tatum's role be when he returns? Will he have to adjust to Jaylen Brown's emergence? Will the offense now run primarily through Brown? And perhaps the most ridiculous version of the debate: has this become Jaylen Brown's team? Now, to be clear, none of this is meant as a knock on Jaylen Brown. Brown has been phenomenal this season. His scoring has been explosive, his confidence has grown, and he has stepped into the spotlight in a big way, while Tatum has been sidelined. But the way some people are framing the situation makes it sound as if Jayson Tatum is returning to a team that no longer belongs to him, as if he suddenly needs to fall in line, as if the franchise cornerstone of the Boston Celtics has now become some kind of supporting character. And that idea just doesn't hold up when you actually look at what this team has accomplished. Because here's the reality: the Celtics have been winning games regardless of who's available. Even without both of their stars at times, Boston has continued to perform at an incredibly high level. In fact, during a stretch where Jaylen Brown missed time earlier this season, the Celtics went 6-1. Those weren't meaningless wins either. They came against quality opponents, teams like Phoenix, Houston, and Toronto. The system held up, the depth showed itself, and the team continued to execute at a championship level. That tells you something important about this roster. This isn't a team built around one player dominating the ball. This is a team built around structure, depth, and elite two-way basketball. Boston shoots the three at a high level. Their defensive rotations are disciplined and connected. Players move the ball, they trust the system. And a lot of that credit goes to head coach Joe Mazzulla, who has done an outstanding job keeping the Celtics organized and focused throughout the season. If there were an award for Coach of the Year right now, his name would absolutely be near the top of the conversation. The Celtics aren't just good, they're dangerous. Which is exactly why the ongoing Tatum versus Brown conversation feels so misplaced. Because the real question facing Boston right now isn't who the number one option is. The real question is much bigger than that. It's about whether this team can win another championship. Any roster that can go on extended winning stretches without its best players. Any team that can maintain elite efficiency and defensive cohesion despite injuries, that's a team with legitimate title aspirations. And the Celtics have already shown that kind of resilience. When Tatum was out, they kept winning. When Brown missed games, they kept winning. When rotations shifted and roles changed, they still kept winning. That's the mark of a championship-level organization. But somehow, instead of focusing on how dangerous this team could be when everyone is healthy, the narrative keeps circling back to this strange idea that Jayson Tatum might have to fit in when he returns. As if he's stepping into unfamiliar territory. As if adapting to teammates is something new for him. And that's where the conversation really starts to miss the point. Because if you've actually watched Jayson Tatum over the course of his career, you'd realize something important. He has been adapting his entire career. Despite being one of the league's elite scorers and a perennial MVP candidate, Tatum has consistently shown a willingness to adjust his game for the sake of the team. In fact, you could make the argument that no superstar in the NBA sacrifices more individual spotlight for team success than Jayson Tatum does. That might sound surprising at first. When people think of unselfish superstars, they usually think about players like Nikola Jokic, orchestrating offenses with historic playmaking, or Stephen Curry running endless off-ball routes to create space for teammates. But Tatum's version of unselfishness looks different. His impact stretches across every part of the game: scoring, defense, rebounding, playmaking, versatility, all of it. And he does it while standing nearly 6'10", operating like a hybrid between a wing scorer, a power forward, and a secondary point guard. That's the part of his game that often gets overlooked. Because while the box score might show 27 points or 30 points on a given night, the real value Tatum provides goes far beyond just putting the ball in the basket. He defends multiple positions. He rebounds at an elite level for a wing. He initiates offense. He makes the extra pass. He rotates defensively. He switches onto guards, forwards, and even centers when the scheme requires it. In other words, he does the little things that make a championship system work, which is exactly why the idea that he would suddenly struggle to coexist with Jaylen Brown feels so strange. If anything, Tatum's entire career has been defined by his willingness to do whatever the team needs in order to win. And that's exactly what makes his return so exciting for Boston. Because when you add a player with that level of versatility, leadership, and two-way dominance back into an already elite team, you're not creating a problem. You're creating a nightmare for the rest of the league. Another thing that hasn't been talked about enough when discussing Jayson Tatum's return from an Achilles injury is his shooting. Most of the conversation has been centered around his athleticism. People are wondering if he'll still have the same burst, the same defensive mobility, or the same ability to switch across multiple positions the way he did before the injury. Those are fair concerns. Achilles injuries are serious, and historically, they can impact a player's explosiveness. But there's another part of Tatum's game that people seem to be overlooking: his jump shot. And the reality is, that part of his game isn't going anywhere. Since 2020, Jayson Tatum ranks 6th in the entire NBA in total three-pointers made. Before this season, he was even higher on that list. Over that stretch, he's averaged around 8.5 three-point attempts per game, converting them at roughly 36%. Now, that's not Stephen Curry efficiency. It's not Kevin Durant levels of shooting either. But here's the difference. Tatum is a 6'10" forward taking that many threes. He's a high-volume perimeter shooter with the size to rise up over almost any defender in the league. That kind of shooting profile is incredibly difficult to guard, and it's a huge reason why Boston's offense has been so dangerous over the years. And the best part about shooting? It's the skill that tends to age the best. Even if Tatum returns at 70% of the athlete he once was, the shooting will still be there. The mechanics, the touch, the confidence, those things don't suddenly disappear because of an Achilles injury, which makes some of the concerns surrounding his return feel a little overblown. Because right now, people are acting as if adding Jayson Tatum back into this lineup is somehow going to disrupt the flow of the Boston Celtics. And when you really think about it, that sounds a little ridiculous. You're essentially replacing minutes that might otherwise go to a role player like Sam Hauser with one of the best players in the entire NBA. Now, don't get me wrong. Sam Hauser deserves a lot of credit. He's an excellent three-point shooter. He competes defensively, and he fits perfectly within Boston's system. He's exactly the kind of role player championship teams need. But Jayson Tatum could return at 40% of his usual dominance, and he would still bring more overall impact than almost anyone coming off the bench. That's not a knock on Hauser. That's just the reality of what kind of player Tatum is. Yet somehow the narrative has shifted toward this idea that Tatum returning might hijack the offense, Which is strange, because if you've watched the Celtics over the past several years, you'd know that Tatum is actually one of the most unselfish superstar scorers in the league. He's a willing passer. He runs pick and roll. He collapses defenses and finds open shooters. He rebounds. He defends. He plays within the system. This isn't a ball-stopping isolation player who dominates every possession. This is someone who elevates the structure of the offense. And that brings us to the other part of this conversation that continues to come up every single season: the dynamic between Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. There's this persistent narrative that Jaylen Brown has been sacrificing his role for years in order to accommodate Tatum. But when you actually look at the numbers, that argument doesn't really hold up. Jaylen Brown is on a supermax contract. He has already won a championship. He's a Finals MVP. And since 2020, he has averaged over 19 shot attempts per game. During that exact same time frame, Jayson Tatum has averaged one more shot attempt per game. That's it. One. Both players average almost the same number of turnovers as well, which shows that the offensive responsibility between them has been relatively balanced. In fact, if you look across NBA history, the Tatum-Brown partnership is actually one of the best examples of two-star players coexisting without one completely overshadowing the other. Both guys get plenty of opportunities. Both guys take a lot of shots, and both guys have been essential to Boston's success. This season alone, Jaylen Brown has even been leading the entire NBA in field goal attempts, taking more shots than players like Luka Doncic, Anthony Edwards, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So the idea that he's constantly sacrificing his offensive role doesn't exactly match reality. At worst, maybe he drops from being the #1 shot taker in the league to somewhere around 6th or 7th. And in exchange for that slight adjustment, he gets to play alongside one of the best all-around players in basketball. A player who has had one of the highest plus-minus ratings in the NBA since the moment he was drafted. A player who defends multiple positions, rebounds at a high level, and facilitates offense while still scoring efficiently. And most importantly, a player who dramatically increases your chances of winning a championship. Because that's ultimately what all of this should be about. Not debates about hierarchy, not arguments about who takes the most shots. The goal is winning. And bringing Jayson Tatum back into the lineup doesn't create a problem for Boston. It creates an opportunity for the Celtics to become even more dangerous, an opportunity to compete for another title, and an opportunity for this team to remind the rest of the NBA exactly why they've been one of the league's most dominant forces in recent years.